Hi guys, I'm just doing my book share with you, so giving you a recommendation for something to get through lockdown. The book I've chosen to read, or an extract from today, is Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. It's quite an interesting book if you've ever read any other Neil Gaiman stories. The most popular one is Stardust, which has been made into a film. A lot of you might have heard of that. And basically, without kind of ruining it, this one is about a kind of fictional underground of London where it's an alternative world that they say the bad people and kind of monsters that have slipped through the cracks of normal society and normal London, or Upper London I think they call it in here, where they've slipped through, and it's kind of a very dark place, and a normal kind of man called Richard Mayhew slips through in error, and he can't get back. He gets mixed up with a character which I'm going to show you a kind of part of their meeting, a character called Dor, who is a girl who is in trouble from the underside, so they get mixed up, and it's just an interesting alternative to kind of particularly if you've been to London or know anything about London. It's a really interesting story, so just something fantasy that I thought you might, something in the fantasy genre I thought you might like. So I'm going to read, I think it's 2 extracts, both from towards the start of the novel, just to get you to see if you like the style, see if you like what it's about, just to show you. This is, I think, where Richard meets Dor. Richard did not at any point on his walk stop to think. It was not something over which he had any volition. Somewhere in the sensible part of his head, someone, a normal, sensible Richard Mayhew, was telling him how ridiculous he was being, that he should have just called the police or an ambulance, that it was dangerous to lift an injured person, that he had really, seriously, properly upset Jessica, that he was going to have to sleep on the sofa tonight, that he was spoiling his only really good suit, that the girl smelled quite dreadful. But Richard found himself placing one foot in front of the other, and arms cramping and back hurting, and ignoring the looks he got from passers-by, he just kept walking. And after a while, he was at the ground floor door of his building, and he was stumbling up the staircase, and then he was standing in front of the door of his flat and realising that he had left his keys on the hall table inside. The girl reached out one filthy hand to the door, and it swung open. Never thought I'd be pleased that the door hadn't latched properly, thought Richard, and he carried the girl in, closing the door behind him with his foot, and put her down on his bed. His shirt front was soaked in blood. She seemed semi-conscious. Her eyes were closed, but fluttering. He peeled off her leather jacket. There was a long cut on her left upper arm and shoulder. Richard caught his breath. "Look, I'm going to call a doctor," he said quietly. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened, wide and scared. "Please, no, I'll be fine. It's not as bad as it looks. I just need sleep. No doctors." "But your arm, your shoulder." "I'll be fine. Tomorrow, please." It was little more than a whisper. I suppose, all right." And with sanity beginning to assert itself, he said, "Look, can I ask?" But she was asleep. Richard took an old school scarf from his closet and wrapped it firmly around her left upper arm and shoulder. He did not want her to bleed to death on his bed before he could get her to a doctor. And then he tiptoed out of his bedroom and shut the door behind him. He sat down on the sofa in front of the television and wondered what he had done. Okay, so that's the first extract. I'm now going to read a little bit further on when they've, it's still in the same kind of section of the book, but just gives you a little bit more of an indication of the characters that are from the underside of London. The doorbell rang. Richard looked at the mess in the bathroom and the girl and wondered how it would look to a sensible outside observer, such as, for example, "Oh Lord," he said, realising the worst. "I bet it's Jess. She's going to kill me. Damage control, damage control." "Look," he told the girl, "you wait in here." He shut the door of the bathroom behind him and walked down the hall. He opened the front door and breathed a huge and quite heartfelt sigh of relief. It wasn't Jessica. It was, what, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, the police? He couldn't tell. There were 2 of them at any rate. They wore black suits which were slightly greasy, slightly frayed, and even Richard, who counted himself among the sartoriously dyslexic, felt there was something odd about the cut of the coats. They were the kind of suits that might have been made by a tailor 200 years ago who had had a modern suit described to him but had never actually seen one. The lines were wrong, and so were the grace notes. A fox and a wolf, thought Richard involuntarily. The man in front, the fox, was a little shorter than Richard. He had lank, greasy hair of an unlikely orange colour and a pallid complexion, and as Richard opened the door, he smiled widely, and just a fraction too late, with teeth that looked like an accident in a graveyard. "A good morrow to you, good sir," he said, "on this fine and beautiful day." "Oh, hello," said Richard. "We are conducting a personal inquiry of a delicate nature, as it were, door to door. Do you mind if we come in?" "Well, it's not very convenient right now," said Richard. Then he asked, "Are you with the police?" The second of the visitors, a tall man, the one he had thought of as a wolf. His grey and black hair cut bristle short, stood a little behind his friend, holding a stack of photocopies to his chest. He had said nothing until now, just waited, huge and impassive. Now he laughed, once low and dirty. There was something unhealthy about that laugh. "The police, alas," said the smaller man. "We cannot claim that felicity. A career in law and order, although indubitably enticing, was not inscribed on the cards Dame Fortuna dealt my brother and me. No, we are merely private citizens. Allow me to make introductions. I'm Mr. Croup, and this gentleman is my brother, Mr. Vandermeer." They did not look like brothers. They did not look like anything Richard had seen before. "Your brother?" asked Richard. "Shouldn't you have the same name?" "I am impressed. What a brain, Mr. Vandermeer. Keen and incisive isn't the half of it. Some of us are so sharp," he said as he leaned in closer to Richard, went up on his tiptoes into Richard's face. "We could just cut ourselves." Richard took an involuntary step backwards. "Can we come inside?" asked Mr. Croup. "What do you want?" Mr. Croup sighed, in what he obviously imagined was a rather wistful manner. "We are looking for our sister," he explained. "A wayward child, wilful and headstrong, who has close to broken our poor dear widowed mother's heart." "Ran away," explained Mr. Vandermeer quietly. He thrust a photocopied sheet into Richard's hands. "She's a little funny," he added, and then he twirled one finger next to his temple to indicate that the girl was in fact a complete lunatic. Richard looked down at the paper. It said, "Have you seen this girl?" Beneath that was a photocopied grey photograph of a girl who looked to Richard rather like a tidier, cleaner, longer-haired version of the young lady he had left in his bathroom. Under that it said, "Answers to the name of Doreen, bites and kicks, run away. Tell us if you saw her, want her back, reward paid." And below that a telephone number. Richard looked back at the photograph. It was definitely the girl in his bathroom. "No," he said, "I haven't seen her, I'm afraid. I'm sorry." Mr. Vandermeer, however, was not listening. He had raised his head and was sniffing the air, like a man smelling something odd or unpleasant. Richard reached out to give him back his piece of paper, but the big man simply pushed past him and walked into the flat, a wolf on the prowl. Richard ran after him. "What do you think you're doing? Will you stop that? Get out! Look, you can't go in there," because Mr. Vandermeer was headed straight for the bathroom. Richard hoped that the girl, Doreen, had had the presence of mind to lock the bathroom door. But no, it swung open at Mr. Vandermeer's push. He walked in, and Richard, feeling like a small and ineffectual dog yapping at the heels of a postman, followed him in. It was not a large bathroom. It contained a bath, a toilet, a sink, several bottles of shampoo, a bar of soap, and a towel. When Richard had left, a couple of minutes before, it had also contained a rather dirty, bloody girl, a very bloody sink, and an open first aid kit. Now it was gleamingly tidy. There was nowhere the girl could have been hiding. Mr. Vandermeer walked out of the bathroom and pushed open Richard's bedroom door, walked in, looked around. "I don't know what you think you're doing," said Richard, "but if you two don't get out of my flat this minute, I'm phoning the police." Okay, so that is the sort of extract from Neverwhere, the start of it, that I thought might be interesting. And feel free to read it if you liked it as well. See you soon.